Hey everyone, Toby here, and today I present to you my fresh new series, which are going to be called How to Hardcore. Part 1, Top 5 Things I Think You Should Know Before Starting Hardcore. So, top 5, things I think you should know. You may know some of them or all of them even, but you might have just forgotten or just not given extra attention if you're used to playing softcore. So I thought it would make kind of a cool video just to go through all of them, and let's just roll some random footage of me playing in Chaos Sanctuary as I talk for it not to be so boring. And with that said, the 5 things I want to talk in this video are: first, vitality versus dexterity or block builds. Second, mods or the mods that the mobs get, if that makes any sense. Thirdly, walk versus run mechanics. Fourth would be damage calculation, and number 5 would be teleporting or charging distance. So with that said, let's start with the first one, which is forget vitality build. And essentially, I'm a huge advocate of running a reasonable amount of block on every single character. And there's a couple of reasons for it. The main one, and probably best understandable, not from a practical perspective, but from a theoretical perspective, is making your health pool as effective as possible. So, let's take a couple of quick examples. Example number 1. You have a total health pool of 100 health and your resistances are at 0. Now, you have an option to either increase your health by 1 point or increase your resistances by 1 point. Which one do you choose? Sounds like a no-brainer. It's always resistances. But what if you take a reverse example? You have a health pool of 10, but your resistances are at 75. Again, which one do you choose? Obviously the health right now. So basically, which one is better, whether it's better having more health or more resistances, is absolutely subjective. And ideally you want to increase them both simultaneously. Whether the ratio, the optimal ratio is, let's say, 2 health points to 1 point in resistances, or 5 health points, 1 in resistances, or the other way around, it's completely dependent on a lot of factors like the game. Mostly the game. In each game it's going to be absolutely different. But the main idea, the concept behind this remains in every single game. Like, the higher your health pool is, the more effective you want it to be. And block essentially does just that. It makes your health pool more effective. So, for example, if you have a druid with something like Heart of Oak, you probably have over 3k life. And that's a lot. Now, if you increase that from 3,000 to 3.3 thousand, it probably won't make a huge difference or any at all. Like, if you encounter a pack that would kill you, it will probably kill you regardless whether you have 3k or 3.3. But if you encounter a dangerous pack and you have, either 10% block or 30, that might make a huge difference. So essentially in Diablo you want to always have a health pool that's large enough to not get one-shot by some nasty, stupid, corpse explosion, whatever. But then at that point, once you reach that point, you want to take less damage, not only to be unable to being one shot, but also to take on average less damage, and that's what block does. It makes sure that 40% of the attack just miss you. Another way of putting it would be that your health can never keep up with the damage that minions do. Like, they can easily, with the right mods, deal 500 damage, actual damage to you per 1 hit. So the only way you actually make sure you survive is ensure that you don't get hit by 10 of such hits in a row. And that's where defense and block comes in. And since on something like Sorceress you can't really come up with high enough defense to mitigate that damage enough, that's where block is really the only option you've got left. With that said, ideally you wouldn't, like if we were playing ideally in every single situation, it wouldn't really matter. Like for example, a lot of classes have these summonable meat shields, like Valkyrie, Clay Golem, Beer, Shadow Master. And in places something like Tower level in Act 1, instead of just face checking in every single place, you would first cast your summon. Before entering any new room, since you don't know what is in that room, you would first cast your summon there. And then if it dies instantly, you probably know that there's some nasty pack of archers who have, Conviction, Blessed Aim, Might, Fanaticism all together, and probably Cursed as well, and you just wouldn't face check it. But, let's face it, in practice it just doesn't happen. We always just face check, and once we do face check, we either survive or we die, one of the two. So maximizing your health, it really matters, because no matter how you look at it, we do dumb shit in Diablo 2. That's the end of the story, really. The next thing I want to talk about is basically the mods, or the mods that the mobs get. When you're facing a unique, it gets a bunch of random mods, like lightning enchanted, fire enchanted, aura enchanted, multi-shot, etc. And probably everyone intuitively knows what those mods do. Like for example, fire enchanted increases their resistance by 75, as well as adds some extra fire damage. But it's kind of fun to note that, the exact values, like for example, magic resistance gives 40% heat resistance. But, this is not exactly relevant to hardcore only, it's kind of the same for softcore. However, for hardcore, there's a couple of mods that I think are really worth knowing. So the first one is Mana Burn, which I'm not sure if it's still as bugged as it is, because if it is, then it's seriously overpowered. But from the source I'm reading, it says that mana damage is multiplied by 256 when applied by a melee attack. So if this is true, then essentially this mod alone makes energy sorcerer builds absolutely unplayable in hardcore, because if you teleport into a pack of mobs, you will die instantly. Another thing that's really worth knowing is extra strong. And the interesting thing about it, like it increases both the damage and the attack rating of the unique monster, the boss. However, it also increases the minions' damage and attack rating. So the minions will deal 50% more damage, which is fairly huge, and also increase their attack rating by 33%. So that's also fairly huge. So essentially, when you're playing something like a more squishy melee character, let's say martial arts assassin, or I think zealots are kind of squishy, but I haven't played that in a long time, so I really don't know. Or let's say Jabazon that's facing the lightning immune, so you kind of need to go into melee range and just jab to death. This really matters. Like, you can easily underestimate the damage they deal and just, perhaps not get one shot, but still kind of die. Last thing about monsters mods is probably to never underestimate the lightning enchanted damage. And I'm probably speaking from my experience, because I just recently died to that, but it's just kind of a good thing to keep in mind. The third thing I wanted to talk about is walking versus running mechanics. And long story short, running decreases your defense to 0. At least that's where you kind of see or read or hear most of the time. In actuality, it's not exactly that. It's not exactly factually correct. What running does is it makes the entire chance to hit calculation to be ignored. So when when a monster is trying to hit you, or you're trying to hit a monster, there's a couple of checkpoints. One of them would of course be defense, another is the level difference between you and the defender. So basically, the higher the difference between the defender and the attacker, in whoever's advantage it is, he then has a higher chance to hit or higher chance to defend. Essentially, that's how it works. And there's also a 95% cap on a chance to hit. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the cap is also removed when this entire calculation is ignored, but essentially when you're running and somebody hits you, they will hit 100% of the time, unless you block it. But block only works at 1/3 of the effectiveness when you're running. And it gets even worse for specifically assassins who have this amazing skill weapon block, which usually you only need to spend 1 point into it and you already have like 50% block. Not only, physical attacks, but also elemental. However, the way weapon block works is that when you're running, its effectiveness is actually decreased to 0%. So with shield, you at least have 1/3 of the effectiveness. Like if you had 60% block, you start running, you will only have 20%. With weapon block, if you had 50% block, you now have 0. So yeah, this is especially important for those, not only for something like sorcerers, which is initially really squishy, but also for those melee characters that are often in combat. And when a monster tries to run away from you or you try to reposition, you're probably running, and then you get hit 100% of the time. So you kind of need to think before you move, and maybe perhaps choose to reposition by walking instead of running. So the number 4 thing that I wanted to talk is the damage calculation. And the damage is calculated like this. First of all, it goes through energy shield, bone armor, and cyclone armor. So essentially all the buffs. Then it goes through flat damage reduction and flat magic damage reduction. Then resistances. And this is where physical resistance is also calculated, which in-game it's called damage reduction, damage reduced by percent. Next up is percentage absorb, and lastly it's absorbed by flat value. So what does that mean is that when you have a bone armor of 2000 damage, it can easily be broken in a couple of seconds. So don't feel too safe with it. If you run into a pack of cursed archers, you can still die in a couple of seconds. And again, that's why you need block. Next up is damage reduced and magic damage reduced by flat values. And since they're calculated before the percentage values, they kind of seem like shit, and absolutely in most cases they are absolute garbage. However, there's a couple instances where they are extremely valuable. And those instances are essentially described by, low damage but frequently hitting. So for physical damage, it would firstly be something like the entire Act 3, where you have, a fun fact about Act 3 I just thought of when making this video is that, for example, in League of Legends, you have one champion called Teemo, and that champion alone is enough to annoy the entire League of Legends community, like millions and millions of players. In Diablo2, you have an entire act full of Teemos. Like, full of freaking Teemos. And we still played this game. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, back to the topic. So, versus those flares, versus those Teemos, they actually hit you for very low, like perhaps they will hit you for 50 damage each time, if you don't block, if you don't defend. But, there's probably 20 of them attacking you at the same time, so 50 times 20, that's actually a lot. Now, if you reduce that by, let's say you have 20 flat damage reduction, now you only get hit by 30 times 20, which is much more manageable. Another thing where damage reduction, flat damage reduction really matters is the bugged poison clouds by Tomb Vipers on your way to Nihilpack. And it's common knowledge, I suppose, that they're extremely dangerous. What's, I would say, not so common, but perhaps I'm biased because I just learned of it myself like a month or two ago, that the poison cloud, the second part, which is bugged, which is both invisible and it just deals crazy damage, it's actually not magic damage, not poison damage, but physical damage. So, since they deal like 40 damage per frame, and 1 second has 25 frames, so 25 times 40, that's, death, literally. That's how math works. So, if you have like 20%, not percent, well, fun fact is that your 20 flat damage reduction in that case means as much as 50% damage reduction, which is crazy, because reaching 50% damage reduction percent is extremely hard in Diablo 2. So yeah, those are two cases where damage reduction, flat damage reduction really matters. As for flat magic damage reduction, most notable examples would be, Infernos by Bit Lords or Venom Lords. They never do too much damage, but they're still kind of annoying. The only spell that I could think of that is really annoying and does a lot of damage per frame is Diablo's Lightning. Diablo has this one nasty kind of lightning, frequently hitting spell, which, fun fact, it's not even fire damage. It's 50% lightning damage and 50% physical damage. Like, who the fuck came up with that? Anyway, since it's doing not a lot of damage, but each frame, that's where magic damage, flat magic damage reduced, really shines. As for resistances, it's common knowledge, you always want to have them maxed out. They will be useful always. However, having maxed out resistances is not what makes you tanky in hardcore or, in softcore, whatever. It's the minimum threshold you need to achieve to be able to survive in Diablo 2. Now, if you want to get really tanky, you want some absorb. And the way absorb works is, for example, you have 20% absorb and you get hit by 100 damage. So let's say you have 0 resistance. So you get hit by 100 damage, you have 20% absorb, that means you absorb 20% of it, and you only take 80 damage. Now this is the key thing, if you survive that 80 damage, you then get healed by the amount you absorbed. So effectively, if you get hit by 100 damage while having 20% absorb, you only take 80 damage. But of course you need to survive the initial damage. So yeah, it's a pretty cool mechanic. Since percentage absorb works before flat absorb, both of them are quite valuable. It's not like, damage reduction, flat damage reduction and flat magic damage reduction is useless in most cases. Both of these are pretty much always valuable. So yeah, that's it for the damage calculation. Let's move on. And next up is teleporting distance, or charging distance for that matter. And this thing will probably be the least intuitive for softcore players who want to try out hardcore, because there's even a bug where you open your inventory and then you even increase your teleporting distance by a small margin by hovering your mouse over somewhere in the corner of that inventory while teleporting. In hardcore, you never fucking want to do that. You always want to keep your charging or teleporting distance at most half of your screen. That's it, no more. And no matter how tanky you are, especially if you're playing sorceress like 99% of us are, do not teleport for more, no matter how tanky you are. Like even yesterday I was playing on my kind of freshly thought of build that I wanted to call the Drunk Sorceress, which means that even a drunk guy can play with this build, and turns out not so much. I didn't die, but I almost did. And this build had 45% damage reduction, it had 60% blood, it had 90 fire resistances, 85 lightning resistance plus some lightning absorb, and 20% cold absorb, as well as 1.6 or 1.7k health pool, which is absolutely massive. And I still took a lot of damage by just teleporting into a random pack of mobs. So that's why in hardcore you never do that. I mean, you can easily charge into or teleport into frenzied, a pack of minotaurs on steroids who are on absolute frenzy and just looking for some fresh meat. That's really easy to do. It's really easy to die like that. So that might just be the most important thing you don't do in hardcore. And that's actually it. That's where I'm going to wrap this video up. So as always, I hope you folks enjoyed watching it. And since I don't have a really good idea of how I want this series to continue, like what kind of topics I want to talk about, any feedback or suggestions, in this case probably suggestions make more sense, is appreciated as always. So if you have any ideas as to what kind of topics I should touch in my How to Hardcore series, please do let me know. And with that said, hope you folks enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. See you guys in my next video. Cheers.